Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our second session. This one is the Succeeding with Innovation and Transformation episode, sponsored by Innovation 360 Group. I'm Nava, the site manager of Business Innovation Brief, and I'm excited to be bringing you this session with hard-earned insight on innovation management. Before we go any further, I want to thank Innovation 360 Group for sponsoring this webinar series and helping us to make it happen. If you don't already know about them, they support organizations in establishing an adaptable innovation process and fostering a culture of innovation. Thank you again, Innovation 360. On that note, please feel free to ask questions during today's session. You can do so by submitting them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can throughout and at the end of the presentation. My lovely colleague Erin here will be fielding your questions today. She'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So pull up the questions panel, say hello, and let her know that you're listening. Also, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may wish to choose to dial in by phone. You can do so by selecting the More button in the upper right portion of your screen and then select the Switch to Phone option. But today, the reason we're all here is to hear from Magnus Pinker, and so he's going to be talking to us about innovation, AI, business transformation, and the two stories in this world. The stranger comes to town and you go on a journey. And in addition to being the CEO and founder of Innovation 360, he's also the author of 7 books and the contributing editor of the International Journal of Innovation Science. For the past 8 years, he's been using his practical and theoretical insights to develop InnoSurvey, a leading methodology and global innovation database which is used to analyze and provide advice to companies, leaders, and scientists around the world. If you're interested in looking at the InnoSurvey or his book, we're going to be sending out the link in the chat. But for right now, I'm going to let you take it away, Magnus.
Thank you. And very good evening to all folks in Europe, and good afternoon to the East Coast, and good morning on the West Coast. Australia, I guess it's in the middle of the night, so we might not have any from there. So wonderful having you all on this call. I kind of think of innovation as storytelling, and there are only 2 stories in the world, basically. And that is either a stranger come to town or you go on a journey. Think about it. If you actually are the stranger coming to town, what does it mean? It means that you get exposed to something happening to you, which means that innovation happened to you. If you go on a journey, that means that you happen to innovation. And it's up to you if you take charge of your own life and your organization's life. So that is basically what this call will be about. And I will give some pretty in-depth insights. We spent 8 years on research before we launched Innovation 360, and we've been able to build up the largest database in the world with data about culture, leadership, capabilities. And we use that to actually bring light over innovation management and how to help organizations to not become the victim, to actually take control of their own life instead. So I will give you a few insights about what's blocking, what's typically can be used as amplifiers, and also how you can actually structure your business to make sure that you stay on top. You are the hero of your story, basically. So first, a little outlook on what's happening in the world, and that's quite important because this is actually the part that we can't control. It is what it is, and there is a number of macro trends, and one macro trend is that everybody works with improvements, which means if you don't do that, you die. But it's not enough, unfortunately, because at the same time, we have rapid market change and behavioral change, a population explosion, and a constantly increased expectation from customers and clients. We have a hyper-competitive situation and exponential technology. What this means basically is that everything changes all the time. And you can think about it as an S curve, and I will go back to that a little bit later on. Everything is an S curve. You're born, you grow, you mature, you fade away, and eventually you're gone. It goes for everything, from big corporations to whole civilizations, to humans, to animals, doesn't matter. And actually, think about it, it's quite interesting. You start actually as an individual created out of Earth, and you become Earth again. Everything is circular. It's a circular world, and we have to just accept that. What we can do is to actually stay around longer, and we can find the next S-curve. What we can do is to do it more efficient, reduce the waste, and then we can create something sustainable out of it. So that's what we will spend this hour together around. So a few past failures, short-term incentives. When you work with transformation, if you try to do that to gain some short-term winnings, you will most likely fail. The same goes with that you really think that you know your company. Most of the time you don't. And I've seen this hundreds of times, from the large corporations in the world to startups. It's very rare that you really understand your own organization. You need to do a full 360, ask, reaching out, maybe even take it one step further to observe how people interact with you, to really understand what you deliver. And then you also have a very common failure, that you have a gap between the strategic vision and the actual reality. And that will create blockers for you, because people not buy into all the talk. You have to really walk the talk. And then overconfidence might be the absolute, I would say, most dominant reason to failure, that you really believe that you figure it out, and that is the first day of the downhill. And hyper competition, and not be able to cope with that. So that's a few things. And everybody talks about innovation. As a matter of fact, 90% of the Fortune 500 CEOs say it's critical for success, but only 6% of them have the tool and guidance. So how come? Well, innovation management has been a science for hundreds of years, actually, but it hasn't been spread or well known. So think about it. It is like the CRM or supply chain management or HR or ERP 20, 25 years ago. That's where we are right now with innovation management. It is a core process. It required a core system, and it's an ISO standard, upcoming ISO 56000. We are working quite closely with them, also representing the Sweden in that team. And we also work quite closely with them here in the US. And this is good news that we have an upcoming standard for that. It needs to be perceived as a core process and a core system. So just a few words around Innovation 360 before we head into all the really fun stuff. So we publish a good number of books that you can find on Amazon. We are quite generous with publishing. We believe that the competition is about enlightenment, actually, to understand. So we are headquartered in Stockholm, in Sweden. I live in New York, and here we have an executive office. We're also present in Toronto and Chicago, and we have branches in 30 countries, together with 200 licensed practitioners that are accredited and certified in our methodology. So 50% of the GDP is driven by innovation. 84% of customers want to buy from innovative companies, and 77% want to work for innovative companies. How come that it's not just working then? Why? What is the reason? What's hindering you? Well, there are a few things that need to be in place. First of all, you need to have a coherent innovation strategy. Secondly, you need to base the innovation strategy on the right combination of capabilities. And you have to have an innovation engine that can execute the innovation strategy. And actually, transformation is a special case of innovation. I will jump into that in a few slides from now and show that innovation could either be introversion or extroversion. And introversion is transformation internally. Extroversion is transformation externally. Very often we refer to transformation project as internally, but it could also be externally. So any kind of transformation is the result of innovation management. And innovation could be that you innovate your business model. It could be that you innovate your management system, your organization structure, your processes, your products, your production, or your services. And at the moment, we can see from data that where you gain most is actually business model innovation. It goes fastest, lowest risk, but it's also hardest to do. And innovation could be turned into either incremental innovation, which means improvements, or radical, which means new offers. What's interesting is that in a large study that we published at IEEE in Bangkok last year, we were able to prove that radical innovators are more structured in decision making. They're actually more structured in each part of the innovation process, and especially significantly stronger in decision making than incremental innovators. And that is quite surprising, because most people believe that incremental innovators are safe, they're well structured. It couldn't be more far away from the truth. Incremental innovators are normally very unstructured, the lack of goals, the lack of control, and they are not able to make decisions in a waterproof way or a bulletproof way. And then the question is, how come? Well, most likely because you might survive a few years if you're only incremental. And it has, I would say, been possible the last 35, 40, 50 years. But it's changing right now, actually. And we see a lot of disruption happening due to that. While radical innovators, the one that survive, they normally are also incremental. That's also a very interesting key finding, that incremental innovators are normally not radical, but radical innovators are statistically incremental. So we will come back to that as well. There was a very large study done in 2010 that was done by PwC and Booz Allen at the time, where they showed that if you align your strategy with your capability for innovation, you will actually grow faster and earn more money. So the study showed clearly that if you are a spender, which means you haven't the right capability in relation to what you want to achieve, you grow slower, you earn less, the market cap is lower. And if you actually are an innovator and also make sure that you have the right capabilities in relation to the strategic will, the aspiration, as I call it, then you grow even faster and you earn even more money. So it was a very large study, so it's quite interesting, and we see the same pattern in our data. So how does it work in reality? Well, let's say that you would like to run a transformation project that is quite radical. It could be to actually implement an ERP system, and then you might say, oh, that's not radical. Oh, yes, it is. Actually, Ericsson, I guess you know them, a Swedish fantastic telecom company, when they implemented SAP, they had to merge a good number of subsidiaries. If I remember right, it was 30 companies that they had to merge due to a system implementation. Isn't that radical? Yes, it is. This is the case that when you implement a new system that you need to be competitive, you have to change. That's also why a good number of the IT giants right now are actually start discussing transformation project, because they realize you can't install the software they have if you don't transform the culture and the capability and the way of working in your company. So that becomes immediately an innovation project. And then the question is, all right, let's say that I would like to actually implement something radical. How do I do that? Then you can do correlation analysis between leadership capabilities and strategy. And you can immediately point out what I call amplifiers that could be used to spread them good examples. And you can identify blockers hindering you. And I will actually showcase from more than 5,000 companies in 105 countries with 360 data, making it by far the largest database and study ever done in innovation management. So from that, I will showcase a few lessons learned about blockers. So let's start here. The 5 lessons learned before we jump into the blockers is that radical innovators are more structured. We talked about that, right? It takes 3 times to learn a process. Aha, interesting. Why? Well, if you are struggling in what I call the first horizon of innovation, with meaning innovating here and now, work with incremental improvements, you will be so slow statistically, so you're not able to run through the whole innovation process, especially many times until people rotate. And you need to do something at least 3 times to learn. And this is a very interesting lessons learned. If you try to run traditional agile methods and you try to improve like a process or product or services, it might take you 6 to 12 or even 18 months to get out with something new on the market, which means that you will not be able to run it 3 times until people already left. So this is a big problem. If you work with short, quick, radical tests, you will be able to loop through it many more times and you learn faster, which means that you will become more skilled for incremental innovation, which is quite interesting. And this is a new lessons learned, and a surprise to many. The other one is to fail fast but fail cheap. You can't running around and lose money, but what you can do is that you can actually try many times and quickly. And it is possible to try a business model in a week. I've done it several times for clients. It's absolutely possible. Everybody say, no, can't be done. Well, it is possible. The next one is diverse teams. And what's interesting here is that diverse teams seem to be fighting more because they have different perspectives. And if they fight about a higher purpose, it will serve the outcome. But if they do not fight about the higher purpose and instead fighting over personalities, it will damage the outcome. So if you have diverse teams that are actually linked to a higher purpose, they will outperform conformity. And the 5th lesson learned is to slice up the elephant into 3 horizons. The first one is improvement, that's cash on the table. The second one is pretty quick prototyping and piloting, getting data to make decisions. The third one is the unknown, to learn, to cope with that. That is very quick iterations. So 5 innovation blockers that we found across borders. The first one is silos, that is hindering innovation. We call that innovation connectivity, how you actually connect different kind of innovation vehicles on the inside and on the outside. Lack of faith in objectives, it's very common. And we see that in data as well. And it's very interesting how senior leadership tend to think that, yeah, we run a few workshops and we'll just put up an objective and everybody will believe in it. It's actually most of the case wrong. No higher purpose is also efficiently hindering people, especially if you have diverse culture. Fear of failure, or the flip side of that one, which is actually fear of not succeeding. And that you can't deal with uncertainty. You don't know how to cope with uncertainty. How do you make decisions when you don't know? That's a very common blocker. And it's not an easy one, but it's possible to train and learn. So the innovation management system, the engine, the core of transformation, has 3 building blocks. It's the innovation governance, where you're actually managing, steering the whole work. You have typically like a task force, you have an innovation board, and then you have the support building block. That's the culture, the tools, the methodologies, the capabilities, and the competencies. And in the middle, you have the innovation process, starting with ideas, finding ideas, clustering them, forming hypotheses, start to experiment maybe. And this is a non-linear process, which means that it's not linear. You don't start at one end and end at another end. So to quote Albert Einstein, he said that logic can take you from A to B. Imagination can take you anywhere. You need to think like a Hollywood screenwriter. You have to actually take control of your story. And you have to put up really bold goals. And then you can ask yourself, how could I solve this? And you can generate ideas, you can gain ideas, you can collect ideas, you can provoke ideas, you can clustering them, putting up hypotheses, running experiment, getting more data, and eventually you're ready for making a decision. That's the selection phase. When you do the decision, then you move into the development. And here is the learning. I spent 5 years on the board of one of the most well-known Scandinavian companies for agile methods. And I can tell you one thing from the inside. It is not working. Why? Because you can't slice up an elephant that doesn't exist. You can't have sprints if you don't know what you deal with. And innovation, per definition, is the unknown. When you deal with innovation in the first horizon, incremental innovation and increments, that's fine. That's also why I like to slice it up in first, second, and third horizon, because in the first horizon, you can deal with it. In the second, prototyping, call for more design thinking, extreme programming, maybe partly agile methods. Third horizon, not the possibility in the world. You have to have different kind of methods to deal with the unknown, because that's a unity that you can't divide. So you have to deal with unity that is not possible to divide. There's actually two unities that you can't divide: uncertainty and infinity. So you have an infinite possibilities and it's totally uncertain, and you need to learn to cope with that. So when you run into the development part, what's typically happen is that you run into a problem that you haven't foreseen. That's normal. That's happen if you do innovation in second and third horizon. Then you have two alternatives. Either you squeeze your people to deliver, which is the most common thing to do, and normally always lead to a catastrophe. Or you say, there must be another route. And what you do then is you actually generate a spike. And you go back to the ideation and look for old ideas or generate new ones. And then you go back again. And this is very rare and it's very efficient. And why should you actually go and understand the culture and the capability? So we typically do assessment, where we assess capability and culture, leadership and strategy. Why? Because if a company is lacking of dealing with uncertainty, if you don't help that company, you will get stuck exactly at this specific point. And then it will end up with hero projects that might take off, but most will fail, and it will most likely be failed way too late and cost way too much money. So you need to understand the scene, and in large corporations, you typically have different kind of capabilities. I typically call it radical pockets. You always have radical pockets in large corporations that might actually be up for running this kind of project. And use them for that. Don't use the incremental guys, use them for H1 projects. So you need to assess the scene and understand a full 360 of the scene, who is up for what and why, and what are they able to do. Use that to implement the portfolio management that is clever. So you need to map the portfolio to the first, second, third horizon based on actually the ability you have in your organization. And then you commercialize, and just a word of wisdom, start with the commercialization already in the ideation. So this is the basic innovation management system. So far, so good. However, this is not enough. And the ISO standard is only covering the innovation management system. That's good. But in our projects, from the Global 100 we work with to small extreme unicorns, they all share the same problem. Even non-profit organizations, they have a lack of an operational model. And you need to have an operational model to dock into your innovation management system. Then it will actually work. And the operational model might be one operational model, or actually in some cases several operational models. And an operational model consists of the portfolio, the innovation management system, and the corporate strategy. And then you have that boiled down into specific points that has to be nailed down. That is about management. Should it be centralized, decentralized, or integrated? Allocation, which means how do I allocate market resources and facilities? Competence. Do I have the talent? Do I need to develop? Do I have access to talent? Can I acquire it? Budget. Is it the cost of profit center? Connectivity within the organization. Incentive, internal and external. Technology transfer. How do I create a runway? So these things here, these points here, is the result of working through the operational model. And then you know actually how to execute and create value out of your innovation management system. And everything is about balancing the S-curves. To find the S-curve of today, the S-curve of tomorrow, and find the right balance between explorative and exploratory way of working. That is actually risk mitigation over time, and that has been proven to be way more efficient and profitable than just put everything on one bet. And here we have the 3 innovation horizon model that is based on a good number of other people's work. The first source was Coley back in, I think, 99, a great guy that worked for McKinsey. And then it's used in many versions after that. So Steve Coley was his name, or is his name. The first horizon is operational excellence. The second one is prototyping, hypothesis, acquiring, developing new competencies, finding the next big thing. And the third one is to deal with the unknown. Return is insights. Return in second is data. Return in the first is cash. And you need to work with them all in parallel, then you will risk mitigate. So the framework I developed over the year to assess the readiness for running transformation project, that is a special case of innovation management, is why, what, and how. The why part and the what part is the aspiration. What do I want to do? And then the ability part is the how questions about leadership, culture, process, capabilities. And then you can do correlation analysis, as we just talked about, to figure out, do I have what it takes to deliver on what I would like to deliver? But you can also find if you do agree. And here is the really interesting thing. Most C-suits and most exco, most management team, they do not agree. It's very interesting. So that's the first lessons learned. When we assess, we find that you do not agree. And how should you supposed to raise your children then? If mom and dad is fighting all the time, and even worse, they don't even speak to each other. So it's nothing strange. From the family to Global 100, you have to be on the same page. And then you need to make sure to have the right leadership culture, innovation process, and capabilities. And to be a little bit technically, and a few of you might enjoy this, all of these things in the how block is just lenses. Basically, we assess a good number of underlying indicators. And you will actually, at the end of this call, I will give you a link so you can try it yourself if you want to. So the wheel we use to map out the capability lens is the wheel of innovation. And please feel free to use it as long as you refer to it. It is a wheel where you can actually map out what's driving profit. That's the lower part. What's driving top line? That's the upper part. What is driving external transformation? The right part. What's driving internal transformation? The left part. Then you can break it down into different quarters, looking at offer, sales, organization, or market, or as you might call it, ecosystem innovation. It's very powerful. You can immediately get insights how ready you are. And again, you might have one picture on the corporation, but when you break it down, you'll have different pictures, and then you will actually be able to understand much more about the autonomy of the organization. So, why am I talking about assessments? Well, actually, innovation is like an iceberg. You see a few things on the top, but most of it is under the surface. You need to understand the underlying things and close the gaps. So when it comes to transformation, the right-hand side is about external transformation, the left-hand side is internal transformation. And if we go even further into details here, and this is new, it's not been on the market, you've never seen it before. This is something I reveal right now to you guys. This is totally unique. So the thing is that when you deal with market innovation, you can actually dig into specific capabilities to understand how ready you are, to identify what market and ecosystem you would like to open up, and where you're ready to close and develop internally. And then you have the organizational part, and how do you set the narrative among rank and file, and how do you get people on the same page? You have the capability for that. And then you have the offer innovation that's about recognizing your strengths and building on that to outperform. And the sales innovation is to truly understand your clients or customers or partners on a deeper level. We talk about acting as an anthropologist to really understand what's going on, not ask questions because no one will tell you the truth, because they might not even know it. So I have actually to observe instead. And typically, transformation projects are either that you have a new team that are up for doing something, or that you have a transformation project. So typically, you have a big problem that you would like to transform, or you say, well, I would like to have a special purpose project, and I set up a team for that. Both these scenarios is very common. And I will give you another unpublished thing here today. And that is actually the innovation transformation map. This will help you to very quickly identify the hunting ground for innovation. Have a look at the competitive position and the competitive impact, and you will find the hunting ground, which also means that sometimes you should not innovate at all. So if you have a dominant growth phase, don't innovate. Just leave it until you mature. Or if you're weak and aging, why innovate? Just die. So this is quite helpful to understand where does it make sense to innovate and transform, and where does it make sense to withdraw or close it, or actually just go for it. And the whole idea is to actually very early identify potential innovation hurdles by doing small projects and small experiments, prototypes, scale it up, integrate. By doing this, you will risk mitigate. And you can do this if you work in the horizons, because then you have the nurture you need to do that. If you don't explore the unknown, if you don't do tests, you will never be able to scale it up either. It's impossible. And then people acquire companies instead. And yeah, good luck. 80% of all M&A is failing. So if you really would like to burn your shareholders' money, that's the perfect way to do it. The risk is much lower in innovation, actually. Typically, when you run transformation projects, you do that in a number of phases. The first phase is possibility and result phase, where you take a stand for something. You have typically kickoff, you engage, you create your future, you get everybody on the same page. If it's an organization that's been around, you can do an assessment and figure out where they stand today. If it's a new team, it's more about taking standpoint. Then you start to work together. You try to prototype, accelerate, and then it's always healthy to do an assessment to get like a checkpoint. Where do we stand right now? Coach weekly, and that's acceleration phase. And then you have the implementation phase, where you institutionalize innovation management system, the operational model, maybe you have innovation playbooks, and you adjust things that need to be adjusted, and after a while you can reassess to close the gaps. So the assessment is a key to make sure that you really do the right things and you continue to do the right things and that you close the gaps. This could also be mapped out in another model. This is a version of Tuckman. It is not Tuckman, it's a version of Tuckman that I developed over the years. So I offer this as well today. It's a lot of goodies. So assessing, storming, norming, conforming, performing, continuous improvement, which is the evergreen. So that's a version or a tweak of the Tuckman from the 70s that here we did a lot of research in group dynamics. So in the assessing and storming phase, it's very much about understanding where we stay today, create a baseline, get a buy-in, creating actionable goals. Then you go to identify hurdles, pulverizing them, breaking down silos, creating a formal innovation system, training. Then you get in more to the norming part, where you create norms, and then you try to conform, which is actually to start to implement the playbook, to have specific guidelines, to activate amplifiers you found, to coach, to train. And then a little bit later, you do a number of iterations as we talked about. That's the performing part. And then along the road, you can actually form something that is self-sustaining, which is continuous improvements, the evergreen, where you can reassess frequently to make sure you stay on top. And it's also very interesting to see when you do this kind of assessments. So I can give you a few very interesting insights here. When you assess an organization, typically the second time you assess an organization, they tend to actually lower the scores. Why, you might ask? Because when you move from unconscious incompetent, which is a very happy stage, and most organizations are on that level when it comes to innovation, and realize that, I'm conscious incompetent, it hurts, and you might really understand what you didn't know in the past, then you will score lower until you move up to the next level, which is actually conscious competent. Then you will increase. And the last level is unconscious competent, which means that you are the master, you just do it. It's like in your body, inherited. So it's important when you work with transforming, it's not one-off. It's a long, long journey that you have to go on. And if you do that in a proper way and make sure that you stay on track and take control of your own life, then you also have to realize that you will open doors that you didn't know existed, which means that you will have setbacks, and you just need to accept that and move ahead. So typically when we work with companies, we divide them up to divisions, markets, groups, teams. You assess each and one of them to create like a baseline and a benchmark. After that, we carve out transformation plans, either for teams or departments or markets or the whole company, it's depending on. But we always make sure to have a high resolution to understand where can we find similarities and where can we find things that are actually not in common. So we compare and contrast to find what could be used as an amplifier to showcase, what has to be removed. And based on that, we can actually increase the connectivity. So on the right-hand side, you will see another very unique model here for today. So on the x-axis, you have standard deviation, and y-axis, x-axis, you have the absolute value of one of the indicators that you can assess, let's say capability or leadership. And on the y-axis, you have the standard deviation. So if you do agree that you are weak in specific capabilities and leadership styles that you need to execute on a specific strategy, well, you need to have change management. You need to have coaches. You need to work with people's attitudes. But if you actually instead say that, yeah, we are scoring quite low, but we do agree that is the upper quartile. that means that you have a quite low standard deviation, which means you agree that you are scoring low. Then it's quite easy. You can just tell people, hey, let's do some training. So imagine a group of people saying, we don't have the capability leadership we need. It's very easy, train them. But if you have a group of people that do not agree that they are weak, you have to change. And you also have another situation where you're strong, but you do not agree. That's the activate amplifiers. So at the x-axis is the strengths and the y-axis is standard deviation. So if you have a standard deviation that is very high, that's the lower part. That is that, okay, we do not really agree that we are strong, but that also means if you are most likely, at least statistically, very strong, then you can use them as inspiration. And if everybody agrees that you are strong, reinforce and celebrate. This is like a map that you can use very scientifically to run transformation project, and then you will be better off. You will be faster, more accurate, save more money, stay ahead of your competitors. So how does everything dock in to the strategic work in a firm? So you do external analysis. We use ourselves a tool called PestLed 360, which is a unique tool for doing scenario analysis. You can use whatever you want, traditional PestLed. And then you have the purpose, vision, mission, and goals for innovation. And on the other side of the coin, you have doing assessment, understanding weaknesses and strengths internally. You have the corporate strategy. That is the input for the innovation strategy. And by figuring out the strategic initiatives linked to the innovation goals, vision, purpose, mission, external outlook, what you can do and what you can't do, and the corporate strategy, you will be able to link that very clearly to an innovation engine. And that is what I call the portfolio and innovation management system. And there you go. This is exactly how it fits together. So to simplify assessment, I developed together with Innovation 360 a score called Innovation IQ. It's a number between 1 and 100. It's a very simple way to boil everything down to one single figure. I can give you some fun facts here. In China, large corporation score 62. In US, the average score for large corporation is 43. So it's room for improvements. China is outperforming country-wise everybody except from Israel. They score highest nowadays. When we talk about organizations, I can't reveal that, of course, but I can tell you that it's unexpected that among the top list, we have actually the municipal of Pretoria, because they innovate to survive, and they outperform a good number of the tech giant, by the way. So by boiling it down to a score, you can use this score to communicate. You can put it in the annual report, in the dashboard for the exco or the steering committee or the board. So it's a very helpful score, actually, and you can use that to boil it down and track. My message is, if you do assess and measure, you will be better off in understanding how to take the right measures on the inside when you run transformation projects. If you just run transformation projects and try to transform everything without understanding how people will react on it, it will most likely fail and be very expensive. So that is the message for today. And if anyone would like to take the innovation assessment I talked about, we have a free version online that you can try. It's AI based with deep learning. It's 100 billion calculations, and you will get 40-page in-depth analysis with recommendations tailored for you immediately online. And it's free. It's there for you. And if you would like to do 360, which means that you do this for your organization, just contact us and I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed the call for today and that you have a lot of use for the things we shared with you for today. So we're actually at the end of today's call, and I'm happy to take a few questions or if someone would like to have some clarifications. So over to the control room.
Well, thank you so much, Magnus. First off, I want to say if you are interested in the Inno survey, we have put the link in the chat box, so feel free to take a look at it right now. To you, Magnus, that was amazing, and thank you so much for all the goodies, as you put it. There were so many different methods of innovation now that there were a lot, which I really appreciated, though. And on that, we actually do have a few clarifying questions because people want to make sure they know exactly what to do with these models.
Yes.
So our first one is about the strategy, innovation, process, culture model. Can you explain it a bit more, the innovation process and why that can take 3 times as long or be a little bit more difficult?
Yeah, so I guess it was the one here. Let me go to that one. You mean that you need to, it takes 3 times to learn a process. So if you have a process that is well defined from ideation, selection, development, commercialization, typically it takes 9 to 18 months to run through that whole process if you work in the first horizon with improvements, because you have regulations, you have a market, you have to take things into consideration, commercial things into consideration, so it will be slow. And that means that before you have done it 3 times, it will take 4 or 5 years, and people don't stay in the position 4 or 5 years. So that means that you will never be competent, actually, and it's a big problem. And then the question, why do you need to do it 3 times? Well, if you would ask Michael Jordan, he would say 10,000 times. So I think 3 is very little, actually, and it's based on experience that the first time you don't get it. The second time you have all the questions. The third time you practice. So you need to do it repeatedly times. But if you only work with innovation in the first horizon, you will end up in a situation where it takes, like, worst case 4, 5, 6 years to come there, and people don't stay that long in a position, which means that you never learn. While if you work with radical innovation, the cycles in the third horizon, in the second horizon, might be like second horizon maybe 3 months, 4 months. In the third horizon, maybe a week, which means that you get trained so enormously much more faster. So that has a positive effect on incremental innovation, which is kind of interesting.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. And I like what you said about Michael Jordan. Yeah, he wouldn't be content with just 3 times. And so our next question is kind of along the lines of the fail fast, fail cheap, but also talking about your model where, you said all about the different stages of transformation and how you want to get the maximum cost and efficiency at the same time. But what do you do if, you're stuck kind of in phase 1 and you keep trying different projects, but nothing seems to be working? Like you're failing a lot more than you'd like, but you're not able to accelerate any of these into the next phases. What do you do at that point?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So when we assess companies, we find why they are not able to go ahead. And typically that has to do with that they are poor in coaching for goals. That's a very, very classic reason. Another classic reason is that you don't have the leadership for supporting people to breaking down goals into actions. So you just continue to push people, to recruit talented people, to pay them a little more when they whine, and when they don't work, you fire them. And that is absolutely not how to do it. And a lot of corporations are stuck in that. So it's a leadership problem, basically. And when you do assessment, what we learned is that you can put it on the table in front of a CEO and say, hey, you squeeze your people, but it's meaningless. You need to help them instead. You need to provide them with the tools so they can make their job. And typically it is that you don't coach for goals and you don't help to break down goals into actionable things. That's very, very common. Then there are a good number of other things, like the silos, that you don't work cross-department. Instead, you try to solve it yourself and be the hero of today. And then when it comes to fail fast, well, the problem is that most people are very afraid of failing because they get fired. I see very few companies in reality where the management say, okay, you did 20 fails, that's good. Most of the cases you're gone. So, but if you encourage people to fail fast and learn, that will normally helping you. There is a very interesting doctorate thesis from a Swedish university where the, the doctor he made a thesis based on what happens if you bring toy guns into a conference room, and he were able to prove that you actually increase the efficiency. That's statistically proven. Gun toys will make the meetings much more efficient, and you don't really expect that. So the same thing goes here. You need to encourage people to learn and not making them afraid of making mistakes. So I hope that was a reasonable answer to the question.
No, that was great, and that was really interesting to hear that toy guns actually do make you more productive. I would have thought the opposite, but if you did a whole thesis on it, it has to be right.
Yeah, I think so.
So our next question is about your model in general, and I don't know if this applies at all, but where exactly does the theory of inventive problem solving fit in, if it does at all?
Could you repeat that? Which one?
The theory of inventive problem solving.
Yeah, so we went through basically all theoretical models. And what we've done is, instead of telling how to solve things, we have identified 66 capabilities, 5 leaderships, and we map them to the strategic will based on 7 types of innovation and the strategic questions linked to innovation. So it's another kind of approach. It's not a positivistic approach, it's more a hermeneutic approach. So we take a holistic approach and try to understand the autonomy instead of saying this is deductive or positivism and this is how we solve it. So we don't go in there actually because we don't believe in doing that. So I'm not saying it's not working. Absolutely, it has its place. What I'm saying is that if you want to be able to solve many different kind of problems in many different kind of situations, it has been by going through the last 100 years of current thinking, it's quite, we came to the conclusion at least, that's quite reasonable to believe that organizing yourself for responding is more efficient than training yourself in one single method. So that is, and that would, a single method would be what we call a competence, and you need to have that, but it's not enough. It will not solve the problem per se if you don't really sure what the problem is, of course. So I think that's the best answer I can give. So it's a perspective on philosophy, and we take a more holistic and hermeneutic point of view. If now I use a lot of scientific terms here, but that's how we do it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clarifying it. And now I had a question going back to the end of the slides about the innovation IQ.
Yep.
So, you know, you mentioned like businesses in China, their average is around 62, but most,
yes,
tend to fall within 30 to 50 range. Can you provide an example of either what kind of companies currently look like that and what innovative practices they have or what kind of innovation they're using? And then also, even if you could provide an example of a company that would fall in 91 to 100, and if that's even possible.
I'm not allowed to give names. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm
no, without giving names, is it?
No. So I can give you one name of one European company that agreed to that. That's what I can do. So we don't reveal these kind of things, but we wrote a blog post about the European company that score very, very high. They score 72, and that is high. And they are actually renting out machines for constructing, and they are like super entrepreneurs, growing very, very fast, and they're very innovative, and they have actually changed how a market is working. So I'm not surprised that they score that high because they earn a lot of money, they grow very fast, and they change how a market operates totally. So they take a very old-fashioned business model and turn it into something new, which is quite cool. And they outperform, I can't say the names, but a good number of the Bay Area tech giants, a good number of them. In average, large corporation in China is well aligned between strategy and capabilities, and they are normally having a culture for coping with first, second, and third horizon of innovation at the same time, which is reflected in an innovation IQ. While US companies are normally stuck in somewhere between the first horizon and part of the second horizon, which also make them not scoring that high. So in Germany, they are pretty much stuck in the first horizon. They're really good at that, but they're quite stuck there. And Sweden, my home country, that is normally topping all the lists, is I would say first and second horizon. Switzerland too. So all the investigations that are made over time and published by prestige universities, all of them are based on macro indicators, like number of patents or GDP growth. But if you take like a micro perspective and look at companies, the engineer-driven countries and companies like the US, like Canada, like the Scandinavian countries, like Germany, like Switzerland, they are not scoring high. It's typically countries like Israel or South Africa that are scoring very, very high because they fight every single day, and they have to. So that's the main differentiator, is your ambition and how willing you are to execute on that. So you could say fat and happy, or you can say engineerical driven, or a combination. That is my take on it. So I would say the one that really excel is the one that have to and want to and already good extra mile. And the one that are scoring lower, they're typically stuck in the market preferences. They're fat and happy, they have cash in the bank account, and they don't feel any urgency. And that will cost them. And it has. We had a good number of bankruptcies just over the last year, like Toys R Us, for one example. It's unbelievable. And we have a flight manufacturer. I will not say the name of them. I guess I'm sorry if anyone from that company on this call. I foresee that they might be the next one. And it's happening all the time because you're overconfident. So I think that work on overconfidence is a good thing if you want to score high on innovation IQ.
That was very well said, Magnus. And I think you kind of hit on the main point of this, that if in order to have innovation, you really need to have that mindset throughout your entire company. It can't just be a couple people working to try to change things. So I think that was a great way to end this webinar, because unfortunately we're almost out of time. I want to say thank you again so much to you, Magnus, for explaining all these different models and providing multiple examples of it. And thank you to Innovation 360. If you are interested in checking out more of our content, feel free to visit Business Innovation Brief and check us out on Twitter at Innovation Brief. Thank you so much again, Magnus, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
And feel free to check out all of Magnus's content on Innovation 360, his book, and InnoSurvey as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.